Good morning, class. I hope that you guys are doing well. I am at this time probably in Baltimore, working away, training, learning some new cool hacking stuff. So hopefully, as you guys are learning today, I am learning as well. This week, we're going to talk about cascading style sheets. I've been talking about this a lot in the past few weeks and promising that this section was going to happen. And so we're going to get an introduction to that today. Any questions about homework or HTML stuff, you feel free to email me. Again, just if you don't have the address, it's just brandonedmonds@gmail.com. All right, so CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets, and that's all it does is it cascades or layers on different styles that you apply to it and allows you to create rules for elements. Okay, so instead of having to go through every paragraph tag or every header tag or every certain tag and repeat yourself over and over and over and over trying to style, and then if that style changes, having to go back through and find that particular element you want to change, you can just create a sheet with some simple rules, and from there you can specify the changes that you want to occur. What this does is it cleans up your code, and it allows you to make the site look really cool, add a bunch of color, different style of fonts, and all the other kind of thing. Also apologize for any screaming children, as you know, can't be avoided, so do apologize in advance for any screaming children you hear in the background. So moving forward, yeah, all cascading style sheets are doing is just shortcut rules for making your website or your web page look good. And what it typically looks like, it looks a little bit different than HTML. We don't have the angle brackets or anything like that anymore. We have what's called a selector, which almost always is your element. For instance, P for paragraph or H1 for header one. Could be table for tables, but could also be a class or an ID. We'll talk about that later. Could also be an asterisk, which is a wildcard, could mean anything. Could also be a couple of different elements, which could be separated by comma. So we'll cover all that, but for just a general introduction, know that you'll have a selector, and then you'll have a couple of curly braces, and inside that will be your declaration. These are going to be the actual rules that you want to change to your selector. So think about these as kind of like attributes, because you're giving special powers to that selector, and an often a common one to use is color, which we'll get into next week. But yet you could change the color of basically anything by specifying color, and then you're going to specify comma, and then the color you want, and then a semicolon, sorry, and then your closing curly bracket. So, okay, so if we look at this example here, we have this P selector for paragraph. We have a curly brace with a closing curly brace, and inside that curling brace, we have this piece here called font family with a colon and Arial. So we're setting the font to the Arial font, and we're using the semicolon here. And this is for all P tags. So anywhere you use the paragraph, it'll have the font Arial instead of the default browser font, which I think for most browsers is Times New Roman, but I may be mistaken there. Anyway, this selector down here, we have multiple selectors separated by commas, H1, H2, H3. And each one of these, we're setting the font to Arial, semicolon, saying this is done with this rule. And we're also going to add a rule here for the color yellow. And you can add as many rules as you want. You can add as many elements as you want. And you can even specify if you want just the H1 tags in a list, you could say LI, and then there's a nomenclature for specifying child nodes, and you could say any H1s that show up in a list, do these rules for. Don't worry about getting caught up in understanding all that just yet. Just like HTML, you're going to get exposed to it in small doses over the next couple weeks, and you're really going to get a hold of it. But for now, just know this is the basic structure of what you're going to see. You're going to see some kind of selector. You're going to have these curly braces. You're going to have some kind of dictator here that says, this is what I'm changing: the font, the color, the size, the padding, the direction, the alignment, all that stuff you guys have been asking about is all going to be here, and are all going to be these kind of dictating attributes as a declaration. And then you're going to have a property here, which is going to be what you want this first thing to be. So this property could be Arial, or the specific color, or the specific size in pixels, or a URL reference. Again, we're going to go over all these different things, but each one ends in a semicolon and is in between the curly brackets. Okay. Okay, so now we have kind of an idea of what the CSS is going to look like. How do we include it into the HTML? So there's two real ways to do this. You can do what's called an internal CSS, which just uses the style tag and then the text CSS attribute, or you can use an external CSS, which is the preferred way to do it. And we'll talk about the reasons to do that in the next few slides. But with the external CSS, you actually have a separate file that lists all of your CSS rules, and then you have a little link tag in the header tags. Both of these are nested inside the header tags typically, and from there you can specify your rules. So let's look at an internal CSS. Again, it's using this style tag with the type attribute, and the attribute value is text CSS. And then you can see here we have our selector. This is the body tag, and we're saying where the body tag is, add the font family Arial, and then add the background color. And then this is a way to specify red, green, blue. There's a couple of ways to specify colors. We'll get into that next week, so don't get too hung up on this, but just know that this is specifying some color values to make up a color, and we'll go over different ways to do that next week. And then we have our closing semicolons here and here, and then our closing curly bracket. Then we have the H1 header that we're saying is our selector here, and then we're saying wherever you see H1 header, give it this color here, which I think is white, might be black, I can't remember. But anyways, same thing, ends in a semicolon, and close your curly brackets. So it's a little funny looking right now because you're used to the HTML tags. You can see that this style tag is in the head tag of this document, and that's nice and easy. But if you have a bunch of rules, you're going to want to use an external CSS, and we'll see what that looks like here. So with the external CSS, we're just linking to that page. So we'd have a page called, styles.css, and this is going to be in our CSS folder. And if this is our index.html document, it's going to go inside the CSS folder, look at the styles.css file. All right, and then we're still specifying the type, text CSS, and we're just telling it that this is going to be a style sheet. So for an internal document, again, you use the style types text CSS, then you put your rules in there and you close your style tag. For the external, you just specify this link with the H reference in wherever that's located, and then you're going to give the type and the relative here, which is just a style sheet. We'll go over some demonstration here in a couple minutes as well. And I just want to be so super clear because there seems to be a bit of a struggle in understanding directories and how that works. And so if this is my folder, right, I have this root folder here, and I have this index.html file, I need to say that my styles.css file is in the CSS folder. So that's what the CSS/styles is saying. It's saying go into CSS, this folder here, and look at styles.css, which is this file here. And you can see that this file is inside the CSS folder. So hopefully that makes sense. I don't know how to break that down any simpler, which is my fault. So if you're still struggling with that, don't worry about it. Just let me know. We'll come up with a way to where it makes sense. But in essence, whenever you call a file from another HTML file, you have to think about where that file is on your host or in your folder and figure out how to get there. So If you're in this CSS folder and you want to get back up to this main index folder, you need to think about how to do that. And that's some linking that we talked about in the past. And so if you're still struggling with that, don't be shy. Let me know, because I can't help you if I don't know that you're not struggling with it. A couple use cases of when to use each. It really boils down to simplicity. If you have just a few rules like we showed and demoed here with our internal CSS, that's the best time to use an internal style sheet. When you have 1, 2, 3 rules, it doesn't take up a lot of space. Typically, you're going to have 4, 5, 6 rules, especially if you have a lot of content on your sites. And if you're using the same CSS document across all your HTML documents, it's definitely going to be easier to use the external CSS, because then you don't have to open up every single document and change the styles there. You can just change it in one place. And it just looks cleaner. It helps you keep organized, because you know exactly where all of your styling is. It's going to be in that styles directory or CSS directory. So when you create a new project, I would start with an index.html file in like a root folder, and then I would also include a images folder and a CSS folder from pretty much this point on, because we're going to be working with all 3 of those aspects going forward. All right, let's spend a quick couple minutes talking about inheritance with cascading style sheets. So you can actually specify multiple rules with the same elements at the same time. And so it's important to know what rules CSS kind of lives by and how that will render on your web page, so you can troubleshoot, like, hey, I specified a rule here for this paragraph tag to be, color green, and it's not showing up green. So in this first case where you have multiple rules listed, it's always going to choose the latter rule. It's always going to choose the last rule that you put down. So if in this example here I have H1 is a color black, H1 is color blue, it's going to pick H1 color blue. That's just the way that it works. So if you specify a CSS rule and it's not showing up for some reason, check to make sure you haven't included another CSS rule above or below where you've set that up, and that's causing the conflict and maybe causing it not to render. You can also specify, it'll also choose more specific. So I mentioned earlier that the asterisk symbol, this wildcard here, is actually a wildcard for all elements. And so you're going to say all elements have this background color black. You could come down here and create another rule that says, oh, the H1 element, make that background color blue. And so wherever it finds an H1 element, it's going to follow that, and it's going to be blue, even though you're telling it up here all elements be black, because it will always choose the latter rule. It will also always choose the more specific rule. And probably won't have to worry about that too much, but it's just good to have in mind. And then finally, you can use this important flag. If you're dealing with a lot of CSS rules and you just want to make sure that this gets implemented, you can throw down this exclamation point important behind your declaration, and CSS will know, like, oh, this is the highest priority. This is over anything specific. This is over anything former or latter. If I see this important, this needs to happen. So you could use that if you wanted to. Typically, I mean, you're going to be dealing with lots of CSS if you're going to be using that. Again, you probably won't run into it too much in this class, but it's definitely good to be aware. And I think with that, we can go into our demo here. So let me end this slideshow for a second. And then I want to just drive this point home about all right, so let me put it over here so you can see it. Hopefully you can see that. This is my Dropbox folder right here. And this is the template folder, which kind of serves as what your student folders may or may not look like. And if we go into my code examples for week 7, which is the week that we're in, I have this root folder here. So I created a root folder, kind of like we talked about 2 weeks ago. And in that root folder, I have a bunch of stuff. All right, so I have my index.html folder file, which is my main file. I have a JavaScript and some fonts and some CSS. Now, we're not going to cover JavaScript or special fonts, importing those in this class, but I wanted to use this template just to kind of give you an idea of what a real website looks like. And so anything inside here that I'm linking to, and we'll look in the JavaScript folder, I have to specify JS/ and then whatever the file name is. Same with the CSS. I have this bootstrap and main and custom. And you can have multiple CSS files, by the way, too. You can have as many as you want. And you might want to do that for purposes of, segmenting your CSS for, maybe you have CSS for like a blog page, and you have a whole complete different set of rules for your home page, and so you just want to keep those separate. But then maybe you have a page that uses aspects of both, and so you don't want to retype it all, so you can just reference from both of those. Totally fine. Doesn't matter. Okay, so anyways, back in our root folder, we have this index.html, and it's got to specify anything inside these folders. It's got to specify CSS/ and then whatever the file name is. And I'll show you an example of that here. But let's look at this file, and you can see, well, that's pretty horrendous, pretty ugly. And if we want to take a look at the code here, we can either use F12 key, or the specific key for Mac, and then, or we can right click and do view source. But for our purposes, we're just going to open it in brackets. And then when we open it in brackets, you can see this is a bunch of code. This is just a template I downloaded off the internet. I didn't type up all this, just to give you guys an idea of what we're looking at here. How do you zoom in? And yeah, it's just Control+. There we go. You guys should be able to see this, hopefully. So I have this commented out right now. Here's our 2 CSS folders. Now these are external style sheets, so we're using the link with the reference, and I'm using this relative style sheet. Now you could also throw in the type attribute to be efficient and to be the best programmers you can be. I didn't do that, so I'm not exercising my right to be the best programmer I can be here. And then Bootstrap is actually a bunch, it's really a library of CSS rules that an organization's come together and has created these basically shortcut ways to scrap together some really cool themes and sites and stuff. Bootstrap in itself is a course in itself. We're not going to learn it, but at its root, at its core, it's just CSS. So actually, if we open this up, we go over here and we open up this mini folder. You can see all the white space has been removed, but you have a selector, you have your curly brackets, you have your declaration. It's the same thing as CSS and what we just learned. We're going to be working with stuff that looks more like this. This is the custom CSS folder that we're also linking to. And you can see that we're basically just using this custom folder to override anything from the Bootstrap CSS that we don't necessarily want. And that's also why it's listed secondary on our web page. So if we go back to index.html here, you can see the Bootstrap's listed first, and then any kind of custom stuff we want to add is listed second. So that rule is going to be read second. It's going to overwrite any rules in the Bootstrap CSS file, okay, because of that inheritance stuff that we talked about earlier. And you can see, hey, it's saying go into the CSS folder, pull custom.css. I hope I'm nailing that home. So let's see what this does to our site. Now you remember, this is our site prior to any kind of customization. We have a bunch of links, we have some images, we have a bunch of text, okay? We're going to erase this comment. You can see I just have this commented out for our purposes. I'm going to save the file. Make sure you save when you're making changes. I'm going to use live preview. And boom. Now that's a nice looking site, right? And so I hope you get the idea that, man, we could take cascading style sheets and you can just build all of the nice looking stuff with some simple styling. Of course, this is using Bootstrap, and that's a little bit more complex than what we're going to cover. But the point is you can build this site just with raw CSS. You don't need the Bootstrap to build something like this. It would be a lot more work, but it's possible. So I hope that makes sense. I hope that gives you a better feeling for what CSS looks like and how that should function and how powerful it is for your websites going forward. With that, we could talk about the assignment. I don't have an assignment this week because I just wanted to give you an introduction to CSS. And I have a feeling some of you are still catching up on some of the HTML. And so if you are, get that done, because we're going to start styling your sites now. And we're going to start using CSS. So if you want to play around with it, you want to get a little bit more familiar with it, I recommend checking out w3schools.com. There's a Learn CSS link at the top. In fact, I'll just bring it up for you. But the point is there's no homework assignment this week. I really want I just wanted to get you guys introduced to CSS, and then next week I'll start introducing to you specific selectors and declarations and how you can use them. But yeah, if you go to w3schools.com, right up here at the top, Learn CSS, you can dig through some of these tutorials, and it'll begin teaching you how to do this. They even got some free templates to get you started. And basically you'd go here, you'd read through, click next, and then it starts off with, well, what is CSS? And then you can go through here, and then it's going to start telling you how to do it, what it looks like. It's probably a lot more in depth than what we just covered. And then once you get a good feel of that, if you want to start adding some of your own CSS, that's totally fine, but totally optional right now. Like I said, I just want to get you guys introduced to CSS. Next week, we will go into more in depth, and there will be homework next week. So with that, I'm going to just stop talking. I hope you guys have a great week, and then I will be again on video next week. So any questions halfway through here, something you're confused about, something that didn't make sense, do not be shy. Email me. I will do my best to get back to you as soon as I can. Email me all your questions about this stuff. All right. Thanks, everybody. Bye.